Just give everyone a minute for everyone to join. Okay. I think that's everybody who's in the waiting room has joined now, so we can make a start. Thank you, everybody who has joined us tonight for the Books That Help webinar. And if you are watching this as a recording, thank you for joining us. Hopefully you're in the right place. This is a Books That Help webinar. It's going to talk a little bit about books that help. We're going to talk a little bit about the mentorship, which goes live this evening. We have a special guest tonight, who is Flora Cruft. We'll be meeting her later. She's the current mentee, Books That Help mentee. And I guess generally we'll be talking about tips, actually, whether you're going to apply to the mentorship or not, but tips for writing emotionally charged social issue books more generally. And there'll be chance for a Q&A. So that will be the next hour. If you haven't come across me before, I can see some familiar faces and familiar names, which is lovely. Hello to you. But my name is Claire. I am a picture book writer primarily, but I do also write early readers and chapter books. I am a Write Mentor course tutor. I do mentoring. Before I did this as my full-time job, I was a primary school teacher for 14 years. And I had a really good idea about 3 years ago to start Books That Help, which began life as a place for me to champion books that I felt weren't getting enough spotlight and limelight. And there were so many fantastic books on the market that I felt this needed to be highlighted, I suppose. And there were books that I felt could open up conversations with children and dialogue about those tricky times, or could just be enjoyed with emotionally charged themes. All the books that I've reviewed are on the website, and they're arranged by categories. So things like divorce, moving house, grief, loss, but also less serious themes like friendship or neurodiversity is on there, for example. A place really to just collate all these fantastic books that sometimes get missed because there are lots of picture books that get published every year. Here you can find them by category. I then began thinking how I could grow this. So we had a really great response in the first 6 months. It was really well supported, lots of visitors, and I thought, how else can I champion these kinds of books? Because whilst I like writing a range, I do have a special place, I think, for writing books that help when the words are hard to find, which is kind of the tagline of Books That Help. And so I decided that I would love to champion aspiring writers who would also like me, enjoy writing those books that could help, who have something to say, something they've experienced, or something they think children might benefit from in book form. So I approached Little Tiger Press, who I was working with and who published some of my more emotional picture books. So The Tide, about dementia, The Perfect Shelter, which is about living with cancer, and Everything Changes, which is about divorce. And I asked the editor there if she would be interested in collaborating on a mentorship to help even more writers writing these particular kinds of books. And thankfully, they said yes. So this will be the third mentorship since we began Books That Help. And how it kind of works is there will be, after this evening, an opening window open from tonight until the 31st of December, where you can send a picture book text. It doesn't have to be completely polished. We're not looking for picture books that are going to be, yes, this is going to be published tomorrow. It's an idea, it's a nub of something that you want to say to the world. Maybe you want a bit of support getting it into a commercial form, because that's quite hard with these kind of books. And we're writing about personal things, is getting that balance between message and the commerciality of it. And making sure it's also still enjoyable for children, first and foremost, whilst we have a message that we want to share. So we had this idea to start a mentorship. Perry Emerson, who's senior editor at Little Tiger, will help with the shortlisting of texts, and we'll whittle it down somehow to just one. And that lucky writer or writer illustrator will get some feedback on their text from Perry. Using that feedback, we can have up to 5 sessions. So myself and the writer or writer illustrator to use the feedback from Perry to shape and work on any particular issues that have been that's popped up, with a view to sending it back to Perry for a first look. Which doesn't necessarily mean that the book's going to get snapped up, unfortunately, but there's that option there, and there's that contact. But either way, you'll have a strong text that's had editorial feedback on mentorship, and it can be sent elsewhere on submission. So there are more details about how to submit a picture book online. If you go to www.booksthathelp.com.uk, sorry, that's all on there. And we are going to have a Q&A at the end. So any particular questions about submitting, keep those ready. But basically, you get to send one picture book text, maximum of 800 words. Also, it's quite helpful for me for you to include a little paragraph about you and why you think this is a really important text that children need to have. Yes, and as soon as the submissions close, we will make a start. So tonight, what I wanted to do was to just give you some tips and share some insights. And they are things that I've developed after working with these two mentees so far. So Lucy Faulkner was the first ever Books That Help mentee. If Lucy's watching this back, hello. She won the first year with her book called Dung Beetle Doug, which was funny, rhyming, character-led, with eco themes. And also Doug had a journey. So there was a theme of self-esteem and standing up for yourself in there too. And we also have Flora with us tonight, who we'll be meeting later. And Flora is this year's mentee, Flora Cruft. So things that I've gleaned from working with both Flora and Lucy and working on my own emotionally charged picture books are that these books that helps that we're talking about, they don't necessarily have to just be lyrical and sensitive and quiet. You could still have a funny picture book that has a message that will empower children. So just because some of my picture books that are sort of fit into this market tend to be more poetic and lyrical doesn't mean yours has to be. Picture books are brilliant because there's a massive range. So bear that in mind when you are deciding whether you have a text that might fit, when you're writing a text. It doesn't necessarily have to be soft and gentle, but it could be. And we're going to share some examples of picture books later, which might help. My big thing really that might be helpful for you all as you are submitting is to make sure that whichever idea you send and whichever kind of voice it has, whatever kind of tone it has, is to make sure that it's a really sort of winning idea at the heart of it, that it's a high concept idea. And what I mean by that, I have some little tips, is a really powerful premise that's easy to communicate, immediately understood. It could be original, but that's quite hard to do. If it's not an original idea, can it still make it intriguing? Often that's with the title. And one big thing about these picture books is, and actually with any picture book more generally, is does it have a broad appeal? So try not to make it too niche and too specific, and make sure it's something that a wide range of people will want to read. You could ask yourself these questions as and when you submit. Can you write a pitch line for your text? Have you really identified what the nub and the focus of what it is that you are saying and doing in your text? How is your idea doing something new? So it's a really good idea to look on Books That Help, but look in the library, look in the bookshops, look online. How is your text doing something a little bit different? It could be similar, and there might be comp titles, but how is your particular picture book giving a fresh take or saying something a little bit different? Will it resonate with a wide audience? So that's a broad appeal. Does it have a strong hook? And is there a clear and compelling problem or question to solve? And that's, I guess, more general for picture books. Generally, if you don't have strong tension at the start, it's quite difficult to get your reader to be engaged and to care. So ask yourself if you have something clear at the start that you're going to unravel in the picture book as we read it. So other little tips. Your picture book could be on a big theme like loss or divorce that are really sort of very difficult life experience, but it doesn't have to be. It could be friendship. It could be self-esteem. It could be bravery. It doesn't have to be a very serious topic. It could be quite light-hearted. It could be going to sleep. So a Books That Help doesn't necessarily have to mean something deep. It could just be something that's empowering for children more generally. It might tackle a gap in the market, something that you've noticed there isn't anything on this particular thing. That could be how your book helps. But whatever it is that you decide, tell us why you think it's a book that should be in the world. And also maybe why you're the person to write it. That might be helpful for me to read. So I have prepared a few books that help talk about some of my favourite reads of this year in the hope that we can get conversations going about what is a book that helps and how has it been done. So this is my first pick. Sarah Taghome and Manu Montoya. This is When Will My Woodlouse Wake Up? And this is a child's first introduction to loss with the death of pet woodlouse Lord Geoffrey the First. I'm not going to read all these spreads out, but one thing I love about the voice in this is that Sarah has really captured how children feel and speak. So it definitely feels like she's embraced the child's sort of child-centered angle in this respect. And there is a kind of offbeat humour in here, but we're dealing with a big subject. She's handled it in a very compassionate and gentle way. So whilst there are funny elements to it, overall it's still a very loving and thoughtful and nurturing read. And this is a child's first, could potentially be the child's first look at loss. So she's come at it from the angle of Paul Woodlouse. Lord Geoffrey is incredibly, definitely dead, but he doesn't really know what that means. Does that mean that everyone's going to die? What about the other cats? So it's a really lovely, child-friendly exploration of loss. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it. My next book that help recommendation is All Aboard the Bedtime Bus, so a completely different kind of book. One thing I would say about this is feedback that I've had from editors and my agent is that books at the moment, editors are tending to want to have a strong narrative, strong plot with ups and downs, nothing too slight. However, if you have a really high concept idea like a bedtime bus, maybe you can get away with less action. Generally, I'd be pushing you to think about what's enough happening in your story? Are there enough highs, lows, and different kind of plot points? This is quite a gentle plot, but it's a really big, high concept idea. So the idea is that characters board this bus, they travel to different places, and each one mirrors sort of part of a bedtime routine, brushing your teeth, getting changed, having a story, before they end up snoring at the end. The voice in this just suits bedtime perfectly. It's very lyrical. Parts of it, I'm sure, could be sung if you wanted it to. It's really beautiful and poetic and dreamy. And I guess the other reason why maybe this hasn't got such a strong narrative is it's a bedtime book. So maybe you don't want to wow children out with a big high stakes and action plot because it's bedtime. So that might be one reason why your story doesn't have such sort of a strong shape if you're writing a bedtime book. So next up, I've chosen Troll, Francis Stickley and Stefano Martinez, which is a really clever play on words about a troll who trolls. So this troll lives under the bridge and shouts nasty things to the passers-by. It is a rhyming book. It's done very, very well with rhyme. And eventually the troll, spoiler alert, the troll learns that actually by trolling others, they're also trolling themselves and what we say to ourselves matters, what we say to other people matters. This is great because it's got a message that is really important for children, particularly for Anti-Bullying Week, which just at the end of the month, beginning of the month, I think. So a really empowering but timely message. I liked the play on troll and trolling. I thought that was quite clever. If you're doing wordplay of that nature, be careful that your whole story doesn't rely on the pun working, because when a book is translated abroad, that pun might not necessarily work. In this instance, it works well because there's a play, adults will get the trolling and troll reference. But even if it was a different language and trolling wasn't the same, didn't sort of have the same sort of pun, it would still be a good concept. So it's just an extra layer. This is quite a long book. I think it's 16 spreads. So my recommendation would be to try and fit your picture books into 12. In reality, an editor might add or take away spreads at the point that a book was taken on for publication, but it's really important to show that you understand how a book is paginated, which is why when you submit your story, if you're applying for the mentorship, it's great to show us how you think the book could be split into 12 spreads. I also chose Lou Fraser, Paddy Donnelly, Ava and the Acorn. Two reasons. One, Lou is beautiful, has the most gorgeous, the vocabulary in Lou's rhyme is incredible. So if you're writing a rhyming book and you haven't come across Lou before, I definitely recommend her. I also chose this book because this is a book about loss. not just loss, but there are themes of it. And generally, that's quite hard to do in the markets. There are lots and lots and lots of books about loss. So, as I mentioned before, my advice to you would be to make sure that your book is doing something different. If your book is about grief, um, it's going to be important that you um, make sure yours is standing out and is doing something new that people haven't seen before, because often publishers already have books on loss on their list and they won't want to be in competition with themselves. This is nice because it's got several layers. There's loss, but there's also a non-fiction element to it. And last but not least, I chose Dr. Fairy Tale. I chose this one because you might initially think it's not necessarily a book that helps. It's actually a book about kindness, and what you give comes back around. But that still counts as a book that helps because it's an empowering story about kindness, and giving, and generosity. So in this story, you have a fairy tale doctor, and she visits traditional fairy tale characters and helps them. But eventually, she also needs help, and they are there for her, like she has been for them. So it's not a strong message. It's not a serious message. It's quite light-hearted and quite light. Um, but that also still counts. So if you're writing something alongside, you're like, I'm not sure if it counts as a book that helps. It's not necessarily got a really strong, powerful message that I'm sharing with the world. That's fine. Um, if it fits in this kind of category, there's a book with a theme or a book with something that children will benefit from in terms of their emotional well-being and their dialogue and how they interact with others. So, a few little examples of some books there. I thought it might also be worth looking at the timeline of things. So, we've got the webinar this evening. Submissions open tonight, and they'll stay open until the 31st of January when we'll do the reading. Perry and I will be getting together to shortlist, and then we anticipate that we'll be able to make an announcement in February. For that, please look on social media and on the website. And then after that, mentorship sessions can start with whoever the lucky writer illustrator is, and they can be at mutually beneficial times. And to give you an idea, Flora and I submitted about a month ago to our final finished text, haven't we, Flora, to Perry. So we've been working together, for about it's a good half a year, certainly a few months, isn't it? So we spread them out, as we wanted to, really. So that can be flexible. So I think it's about time that we met Flora now. I'm going to stop sharing so we can see you, Flora. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. So Flora very kindly offered and agreed to come along this evening so that we can meet her, talk about her experiences of mentorship, find out what are her favourite books that help, with a view to helping you with your submissions. So Flora sent her story in this time last year. It was called The Fawn, and her writing was absolutely exquisite. It might be interesting for you to know what drew us to Flora's text. So Flora is a poet, and I think if you didn't know that, you would read her work, and I think you would be able to tell. It was just the most exquisite prose that I absolutely just adore reading. So the voice in it was strong, and it was really emotive. There was this lovely story about, without giving lots of spoilers away, because obviously we hope this book will be a real book that we can hold soon. Like a magical wish fulfillment element to it. So something that I would love this. I would love to be Ivy, the main character in the story, and be able to experience all the things that she experiences. So beautiful voice, a lovely concept, but a relationship between Ivy, a little girl, and a fawn where she's living. And also what struck me, Flora, about your story was the relationship with nature. I felt the sensory things that you had described and the connection with nature was a personal win for me because I love reading books like that. Yeah, and so we chatted for a long time about Flora and her beautiful words. And Perry and I eventually settled on working with Flora for the year. So we've had some feedback from Perry. We've been working on the story over a few months, and now it's gone back to Perry for his final look at it, and we're waiting to hear what he thinks. So they're really right, aren't we, Flora? So welcome tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for the incredible experience with you. The mentorship has been really so useful and so inspiring. And I do encourage everyone to have a go and send a story in. I only sent my story in, I think it was on the last day. I
Did
wasn't
you?
sure whether I was going to or not. So it really is worth giving it a try.
And why didn't you apply sooner? What was you sort of undecided about?
Well, actually, I was thinking that I was going to start at the Golden Egg Academy doing their year-long picture book course. I had studied with them previously, and I'd studied with you previously as well on the picture book course, which was brilliant. And then I heard that I didn't get in I got rejected from Golden Egg, and I hadn't really considered doing both. I thought that would be too much. So it kind of opened the door to me to
Lucky
try
us.
for mentorship.
Lucky me.
Lucky me.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting. So how much writing had you done up until that point? So you had done a Golden Egg course before.
I did. Well, yeah, let's think. I mean, I wrote poetry on and off from my 20s and had a bit published in my 20s, and then really only started taking my writing seriously um, in my kind of early 40s, and had a first book published of poetry for adults, prose poetry for adults about mothering twins and the kind of tri-generational relationship between mother, grandmother, and twin daughters. And so I did that when my own daughters were that much older that I could actually have any time to focus and sit down and try and write. And then when I did that, I really wanted to start to kind of really explore this long held dream of writing for children, both picture books and fiction. And so I think, first of all, I did the sort of introductory Golden Egg course, which was more really on writing fiction, the middle
Mhm.
grade fiction, which was really interesting, but it helped me to recognize that I was very passionate about picture books in particular. And then I did your course with Right Mentor, which was brilliant. And I just didn't want it to end, basically. I could have done it. I still could be doing it now. I'd love to do it for years. It was just so much in it. And I really enjoyed not just learning about the craft, but the kind of camaraderie between the group and what we all got from it there. So, yeah, I felt like, I wasn't entirely sure that my text that I was sending in kind of fitted the criteria enough, that it was a social issue enough, because
Mhm.
it was very lyrical, and I wasn't sure, yeah, what you were expecting in a way
Mm.
from a submission. So it was really interesting to find that actually, as you say, you made that clear tonight, that you're really open to all sorts of different kinds of stories. Anything that's got a kind of emotional, social depth to it
Mhm.
and a message. Yeah,
Yeah,
so that's how I
absolutely.
ended up with you,
That was
which is
it. That's
wonderful.
how it began.
Mm,
Ah, super.
yeah.
So without putting you on the spot too much, what were the highs?
Mm,
Like what were the really great bits of the mentorship that you enjoyed?
so much. Firstly, I think having that time with you where we could really delve deep into the story and kind of brainstorm and find new ways into thinking about crafting it, really, because I think um, that was not my strong point. I didn't know that much about how to kind of craft a story in terms of the conflict, the core message, all these kind of important parts. I just knew how to write pretty words. And it was so helpful to get your expertise in sort of how to shape it, and also Perry's, because Perry gave me some
Yes.
really useful feedback,
Yeah.
and encouragement too about how to bring out the theme, the core message of the
Hmm.
story, which I really did with you. And it meant that it there was quite a lot of time, wasn't there, where we were actually almost deconstructing the story,
Mm.
first of all, and then drilling down into what I wanted the core message to be, and how to kind of translate that onto the page with the quite minimal word count, really, of the story, because it's only about, what is it, something like 450 words, my story.
Yeah,
um, and I think it was more than that when we started.
it might have
So
been.
we made
It
lots
might-
of changes. Yeah, so being able to, use you as a springboard, and to be able to, it feels like, brainstorm and find new
Mm,
ways into writing the story, or how to maybe change parts around in terms of the actual formation of the spreads and how it all sat together. That was all brilliant. And yeah, just to get a chance to have you, really attending to and kind of encouraging my writing, I think was really good for my self-confidence as well as a writer.
good.
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, and you should. I think you're an incredible writer, and I'm sure everybody else will agree when they get to see more of it of your writing. But I think
thank you.
as writers, we lack in self-confidence, and it might surprise you to know that probably most writers do have those sort of ebbs and flows
Mm,
to how you feel about your own work. And also that that there is this collaborative sort of system that we've had going on over these few months is often how I might work with an editor. So even though I might work
yeah.
with an agent on a text, doesn't necessarily mean it gets picked up in that format. Sometimes it does. Occasionally, maybe twice. I think I've had a picture book that had very small changes, if any. Most of my picture books have had more of a back and forth, and more of a we like this about it, but could you try a different end, or could you bring out this, or we're not sure about that. Could you switch it? And so what we've done together, Flora, is kind of how I've worked with editors, and people don't see it necessarily, but there is a lot of collaboration on picture books. So yeah, so hopefully that set you up for when you do end up working with editors, you'll have had a taste of that kind of process. But I don't think it's necessarily something people are aware of, maybe until you start. It's brilliant. I think it's brilliant because you get lots of different inputs and different hats and different opinions and
Yeah,
craft the strongest story possible, which is hard on your own.
it is. And it's great to hear all these different perspectives, because I think you can get really, really kind of set in your own when you're doing it on your own in your room, and then thinking of sending it off into the world. It almost feels like it's um a complete piece, but actually it's really, this is just the start of it, as you say, potentially, because then in the mentorship, or with an editor, or even with an agent,
Hmm.
so often, as you say, it's actually about being kind of open to collaborating, and changing things, and maybe, killing your darlings sometimes, taking out your
Sometimes.
favorite bits or whatever it is. Just being open to that. Yeah. So that was, I say, actually in some ways the highlights, but also some of the most difficult bits too,
Mm.
of,
That was my
feeling
question.
like,
My
oh
next
my
question was
God.
going to be, which of the bits did you find hard? What there
Mm,
wasn't, there have been trickier times in the mentorship as well as great times. Overall, we've had I've enjoyed myself, and I know we've worked really well together.
yeah.
And there were times when you were like, I was like, we're nearly there, but what do you think
Yeah.
about this? Was that one of the hard parts, like how long things took, and the number of sort of yeah, I guess they are. It's like a puzzle, isn't it? You do one thing, but it has a
Mm,
knock-on effect on other parts. So there were a few sort of
yeah.
everything to fix into place is quite a sort of a lengthy process at times.
It was, to take on board the feedback, and in a way to know that it wasn't quite there yet, but have to sit with not quite knowing what was going to work, and really experimenting and feeling a bit in the dark. I think in the kind of middle months, maybe, of feeling like, well, we're creating something. I've started with the story that I sent off is like a springboard
Hmm.
to what it could be. And I'm not quite sure how to get to where that is or what that looks like. And a bit of a leap of faith,
Mm.
loads and loads of basically rewrites. And I think I'm on something like, draft 77 or something now that we sent off.
Really?
But
Gosh.
how it started,
Yeah.
because this story actually started quite a while ago as more of a sort of poem, way before I came to your course, or then sent it off when it felt like it was already a story. It started out as a poem and became more and more structured into a story over time, which I know isn't probably the normal way of doing it, and maybe has made it, yeah, a bit nerve-wracking at times for me to kind of think, is it really going to work? What am I making here? And to not lose maybe the soul of it,
Mm.
how it started.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm,
I could do that. But I think you would. I think you did brilliantly because there were times where we suggested things to you that were you a bit like, okay, this is a different, maybe this is a different story. But I think you've got your original version. So what we're really doing is playing
yeah.
with different ways of doing things. Different plots, slightly different themes, to see if it does come across as something you're happy with. Because ultimately, it's your story, and we're sort of throwing lots of different things at you for you to pick and choose from.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm,
it's quite exciting to see how it has evolved, from
yeah,
beginning.
it really has evolved.
And you
Mm.
kept the faith. And
Yes, I did. That was something that, yeah, in the middle part felt a bit tricky. But I think just again, knowing that you were invested in it emotionally, that you kind of wanted to help me through it,
Mhm.
meant that it was just part of the process and I wasn't going to give up
Yeah,
on it. So I think that is again one of the real highlights of a mentorship is that you're learning with the support and encouragement of somebody like yourself who's really experienced, but also really warm and lovely person who, wants it to work, wants to help you get to something that feels like a kind of meaningful story at the end of it.
yeah. Thank
Mm.
you. Yeah, I do definitely believe in these things. So what about other books that help? Have you got any favorites that you've
Oh,
read and enjoyed, or read with your children and enjoyed?
loads. So many. I've got a pile here. We might not want to go through them all, but yeah, where to start? Maybe let's start with Oh No, George,
Hmm.
which is hilarious. And also really simple. And what I love about it in terms of how it helps, I think it's incredibly relatable, not just to children, but to adults too. It's about this dog, George, who is trying to do the right thing, trying not to eat the cake that's been left in the room with him, trying not to chase the cat. And so often he just can't manage it. He eats the cake, he chases the cat, and there's a lot of these wonderful kind of interactive parts, like what will George do? Will he eat the cake? And my children, yeah, and ends with this great kind of cliffhanger at the end of because George had learnt to control himself a bit more and he's being very good. But then he finds the rubbish bin, and there's nothing George likes more than rubbish. And the final question is, what will George do? George. So again, the children are really kind of involved, and there's a discussion at the end about what do you think he did? Did he
Mm.
manage to not go crazy in the dustbins, or did he? Yeah, so that's one I love. And then on a totally different um theme, we've got, say, Out to Sea, which is very lyrical, very beautiful depiction of a little girl's experience of her sadness, really. It's about her grief, the loss of her grandmother, but it really becomes much more about a sort of poetic sort of metaphor of how she copes with her sadness and her waves of grief, which I think is very simple again, but very effective in terms of kind of giving that message of the sadness, the
Mm.
waves will pass. You will find ways to ride it out.
It's nice to make
Mm,
something intangible like that a bit more physical and understandable, isn't it? More concrete for children to get their heads around, really, and adults. I mean, I mentioned earlier at the start,
yeah.
I came to these kinds of books writing about things that either I'd personally found hard or was difficult for my children. And I was like, I
Yeah.
didn't know that was how I had written one sort of fantastical story, but I just started writing for myself or for my family, and those are the ones that seem
Mm,
to connect most with agents and editors. But really, I was sort of doing it for myself, and there is an element of
I think that's
writing
important, actually, isn't it?
and writing what you care about as well, because it does. I
Yeah.
think across when when you really believe in what you're writing, and when you've got a really strong
Definitely.
reason, a really strong why as to, that's why I think the why part of the submission is really important,
Mm.
because it's interesting to know what is it about this particular text. You might have several books that help, in your submission pile, and you're thinking which one to send. I think it's important for me, and maybe for Perry, and more widely, to think about why this book, why is this the one that really needs to be out in the world, because that will filter through into your words and into the final product, as it were, the final book. I think it's a yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, writing my story, it was very much about um, a combination of things, of sort of delving into my experiences of walking through the woods with my twin daughters when they were little, and meeting deer or seeing them, from afar, and the kind of magic and the sense of fantasy that was just sort of opening up in their minds at just meeting a deer, and thinking about the life of a deer that lived so close to us in the woods near
Mm,
us. And then things like, for example, I'm queer, and growing up, I don't remember reading any stories, any picture books in which there was a queer or, lesbian, gay family.
mm,
So it felt quite important to me that I wanted to kind of open up the scope of it, to have two mothers with little Ivy, and for that just not to be even commented on, but just be a sort of background part of the story, that this was her norm. So yeah, there's always that potential to kind of make stories more inclusive, I
mhm,
think, without it necessarily having to be the main,
mm.
uh, you know, part of the story, as it were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a lovely part of your submission, was that it was a story, a magical story with incidental inclusive representation.
Yeah.
Nice. But then obviously there is a space for both, isn't there? There's also space for books more obviously, more overtly on that topic, or other
Sure.
but yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you've got something like about, this is quite obviously centered, this topic on
Mm,
disability, Mama Car, which is such a beautiful and kind of loving story about the child's relationship with her mother, and her mother is in a wheelchair. And so in a way it becomes about the child's relationship with the wheelchair as a source of support, for her and her mother, and the pleasure that the child takes in it, and really kind of normalizing it in a way that again feels quite modern, perhaps, without
definitely.
being preachy, or oh poor thing, or patronizing, or anything like that.
Yeah.
This is just, this is our life, this is the happiness we take together in it, which feels quite universal, really.
Mm. Yeah, universal themes and a
Yeah.
child-centered angle as well, isn't it? Coming at it from
Oh yes.
a
Yeah.
real sort of like getting into the thoughts and feelings of a child, that you're writing for, and
Mm.
exploring that avenue. It's lovely. Do you have any
Yeah.
tips, Flora, for anybody thinking about applying?
I do. And that one you just said is a really good one, to try and get into the mind of the child, so that it's the child's voice that's speaking.
Hmm.
I think it can be useful to remember your own childhood, and to actually kind of think about particular times in your childhood where you felt particularly kind of emotionally moved or upset, or had challenges that you had to go through, because there's a lot in there that actually feels very authentic if you can then find ways to bring that as a story to the page. I think about, and I learned this much more from working with you and the mentorship, think about your core message, think about what is the takeaway that you want the child and the parent to have at the end of the story. And you don't have to be preaching. In fact, it's best not to kind of write in an educative way, unless maybe it's narrative nonfiction, or just nonfiction, which is
Yeah,
different, isn't it? I don't know, are you open to those submissions? Oh, that's
yeah,
good. Yeah,
yeah.
so it's a real mixture you're open to.
Mhm.
But if you're writing more of a narrative, then don't try and teach children anything. think of it more in terms of how can you entertain them? How can you inspire them? And really kind of inspire their imaginations. Another aspect of working with you was it really helped me to make the story much more magical and therefore I think much more commercial. So that's something to think about as well. What can you do to make this feel like it's really quite out there, quite magical, push
Mm.
the boundaries of your imagination. Maybe experiment with different ways of writing your story if you're feeling a bit stuck with it, like, change the narration from third person to first or vice
Hmm.
versa, or write it from the perspective of a different character in a story. Um, I think things like actually reading it out loud is really helpful and kind of seeing how it sounds and whether there are any clunky bits that you only notice when you read it out loud. We did a lot of that in the mentorship, didn't
Good.
we? We would
Yeah.
read it out loud.
Yeah, I found that so
Mm,
helpful to hear when somebody else
yeah.
reads the book aloud, and when we read it aloud, I actually found that I prepared feedback before we met each time, but when I read it
Mm,
aloud, I noticed different things. When I shared
yeah.
it with you, so it was a good part. But it's like a little mini mentorship just there, Flora. All those tips you've just given, I feel like you've just given like a condensed version
I've
of like
got
a
more if you want.
oh yes, keep going.
Well, I mean, simply things like if you feel, and I certainly found this when I was working on my story at all the different stages, if you feel like you're stuck, then maybe have a break from it for a few days or a week and kind of leave it and come back to it with fresh eyes. Because I think, again, that can be really useful to then spot the bits that feel like they're working and the bits that aren't. Um, and certainly, if you can, show it to maybe somebody whose opinion you trust, possibly even if you can, a writer or writers group, critique partner, because then again, you'll just get a totally different reading of it, which could be helpful before you submit. Mm,
Yeah, lovely tips there. Thank you, Flora. There's so much
thank
to unpick
you.
there. I could spend an hour talking about those things alone. But yeah, you gave some really helpful tips. Yeah, super. Thank you for sharing those. I'm sure everybody will
Mm,
appreciate hearing
no
from you
worries.
as well. What things could be helpful as you're sort of polishing your submissions and getting them ready.
Thank you.
So we've got a tiny bit of time left in case there are any questions. It could be something for Flora, it could be something for me, it could be about the actual applying, it could be more generally about books that help or about picture books. So if you have anything that you would like to ask, you can either unmute and sort of use the digital hand, or you can add it into the chat and I'm happy to read it out. So have a think if there's anything you would like to ask. Is there anything else you want to add, Flora?
Probably. I've made some notes. Let me have a little look, but I can't actually think of it right now. Let's see. Um, yeah, I think really just write about something that you're really passionate about, you know,
Mm.
or even is from your own experience, whether that's as a child or if you have children, from your children's experience. And there are so many great ways to kind of write brilliant new stories, and I know that sometimes you can get the advice that you get two things like a duck and you put them in a surreal situation like the moon or something like that. And that can work brilliantly. But I think there needs to be something that's tapping into an authentic feeling that you have or that you've experienced in your life, that you're working from that, especially if you're writing emotional or social issue stories. You want to really be able to kind of resonate with it, I think, yourself and the feelings that
Agreed.
you're
Yeah.
exploring.
They're emotional things, picture
Mm,
books anyway, aren't they? I mean, you'll be hard pushed
yeah.
unless you're looking at maybe like an educational narrative nonfiction book. There's usually emotion in there somewhere. Some have more than others. Some are sort
Mm,
of driven by the emotional theme or that emotional plot, and others might be driven by a high concept idea or like a
yeah.
race to space. But there's still going to be emotion in there, and that's why we connect and we care. So it's really important to think about
Mm,
those emotions of your characters, how we're going to feel, and how we're going to feel at the end as well. Like, how will we come away with
yeah.
something positive and empowering at the end of your story?
Yeah.
We had a question about what high concept is, which is a really good question. So I'm just going to share the share my screen again and flash back a bit because it is something quite difficult to. I think it's easier to give examples and harder to actually explain what it is. But a high concept idea, as I understand it, where are we? Here we go. So Mama Car would be a really great example, I think, of a high concept idea. It's visually very immediate, very easy to communicate what it's about, but it's powerful. So it's very quick, powerful, easy to understand, easy to communicate. It might be original or intriguing. So you mentioned Books in Space, I think that feels quite original. Obviously, it's not necessarily an emotional picture book necessarily, but is a high concept kind of idea because it's very easy for us to get excited about it and understand more about it. It's hooky, and it sounds fun as well. So it sounds like quite a fun, interesting idea. Um, so high concept really is describing its appeal and its commerciality. So I guess the opposite of a high concept book is a low concept book, which might feel a bit too familiar, too predictable, doesn't stand out enough. It might be difficult to yeah to catch someone's attention. It might be difficult to stand out on a slush pile of agents or editors. So what we're looking for is the opposite of that, something that is immediately attention grabbing, powerful, exciting, interesting, easy to get behind, easy to communicate, original, intriguing. That's to me what a high concept idea is. It doesn't necessarily have to be big, wacky, and fun. Mama Car isn't necessarily a big, wacky idea. And another example is The Forgettery, which is about Alzheimer's between a grandparent and a child. That's not big, wacky, funny, but it's still a high concept idea. It's about spaghettery, which is a place where lost memories go. So it's interesting. It's original. It's intriguing, and it's quite powerful to actually explain to children this is a massive tree house in the woods, and lost memories go there, and there are doors, and there is a balloon to get inside, and it's a lovely visual idea. So to find out if you have a high concept idea or not, I would actually ask myself these questions at the bottom. So can you write a pitch line for your story? If you can't, or you're finding that it's more like a paragraph than a line, I would say maybe your idea needs to be more focused. Because if it's unfocused, it won't be high concept enough because it will be too big and broad. So yeah, ask yourself if you can write a pitch line, and it's great practice, I think, to actually include that when you submit, so I can see what it is that you want your book to do. Is your book doing something different? So make sure you've researched what else is out there on your area, in the field that you're writing about. It doesn't mean that you can't do it again, but are you doing it a different way or saying something slightly different? Yeah, and so I just have a look at these questions and ask yourself that about the strong hooks and things. And when you're talking about your story and the magical element to it, Flora, I think adding magicalism, that imaginative side of it added an extra hook for me. I think
Mm,
that's because it was beautiful, and there was definitely an element of I want to be in this story and I want to be Ivy. But when you drew, as part of the mentorship, when you drew out that the magical adventure side of it, it added an extra hook and another layer of a reason why children should read it and be interested in it. I think. Would you agree?
yeah, absolutely. I think it took it from something that felt quite kind of domestic in a way to much more fantastical. And that was really useful way of creating a sort of more commercial, less quiet
Mm-hmm.
storyline, and a bit more conflict as well, maybe, brought in all these sort of elements of just raising the stakes of making it
Mm-hmm.
more exciting for the reader.
Raising mistakes, and also the visual appeal, I think, because as soon as you took it
Mm,
from just being based in one setting in the woods to a magical adventure in the woods, then there's a lot more scope to play with, that kind of dreamlike, amazing, you just want to be in this particular place, and the wish fulfillment element of it. Like I would love to go to an
yeah,
enchanted wood. Yeah. So
yeah.
I have another question about what kind of nonfiction, what sort of nonfiction could it be? So I was thinking something along the lines of Ava and the Acorn, which I haven't got to hand, but it's by Lou Fraser and Paddy Donnelly. So it's a book about love and loss, and it's a story first and foremost. but there's definitely non-fiction elements interwoven about, life cycle and trees, and the oak tree in particular. Um, so that's what I was thinking of originally. So there might be non-fiction elements or non-fiction strands to your book. I guess it could be straight non-fiction, but that would be harder because Perry's team, they really are more in the fiction side of things. So yeah, I wouldn't be against seeing a non-fiction book. It's probably better if it's based in a narrative and going down that, a picture book first and foremost with non-fiction elements is probably more in line with what we're looking for. Yeah, so I mean, if you've got a high concept idea with a message or a takeaway that's empowering to children, and there are some non-fiction elements, then that's another tick, another market, another reason why your book will have depth and have interest. So you don't have to include non-fiction in it, but if it does, that's another thing to to entertain and educate and to be excited about your book. Is there anything else anybody would like to ask? Yeah, anyone who doesn't have any questions after tonight, feel free to email, or maybe ask Flora if you want to get in contact with her on social media or anything. I'm sure you wouldn't mind, Flora, if people had questions. Um,
Sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully that's answered some of the things or given you some tips, or maybe just given you food for thought about picture books more generally. Are there any current gaps in the market in these themes? I think that's a hard one for me to. I don't necessarily have the as much of a view of the industry as Perry does, or as always an agent might do. There certainly feels to be some areas that are more crowded than others. So mental health and the environment seem to be particularly crowded. Emotions as well, like books with about emotions. That doesn't mean that you can't be writing them or submit something like that. But again, just make sure that what you're doing is new and different enough. So it's absolutely fine to submit a book with eco themes. It's absolutely fine to write a book about helping children understand their emotions, but there are a lot of them out there currently. So you need to make sure that what you're doing isn't too similar and that it stands out enough, because it will be harder to be more original. Current gaps in the market, I think that's quite tricky because these gaps, by the time we've identified a gap, it probably will be filled because you can't write quick enough because picture books take a few years to come out. You could be looking at 2 to 4, maybe even more years. So by the time you've found the gap, something would already be coming out next month in it. So probably best to do what Flora said and write books that mean something to you and write from the heart, write with passion, and find an original angle or twist on it that only you know, because that will be sort of easier to. You'll be surprised, I think, that if we all wrote books about, you know, bravery, for example, we would all come at it from original angles, especially if you do that work. So if I was going to write a book about bravery and I wrote a list from 1 to 10 about, different ways into that, the first few ideas might be very similar to yours. We might all come at it from a similar place. But if I went down to my seventh, eighth, and ninth idea about how to approach bravery in a picture book, I'd be getting to my more original things. I'm getting out of my sort of my conscious thoughts that we're all in to the back of what's more personal and personal to me. So that's where you need to be. You need to be in that original kind of area where you're bringing your own personal twists and quirks and personality and passions. That's where you need to be. So if you're doing something that's on sort of a more well-covered topic, think about those things. Yeah, hopefully that's helpful. Sorry, I can't give you any particular gaps as such. Although I have to be fair, I have heard that there are still some post-pandemic things for children going on. So it might be worth looking at what children are struggling with post-pandemic and maybe looking at those kinds of themes and seeing if you can fill a gap there. Certainly underrepresented voices are a market, an area that editors and agents seem to be looking for all the time. So anything that you can write from personal experience that you feel is uncovered would be good. As long as it's not too niche, I suppose. So think about the appeal. Okay. Thank you for joining us,
Can I
everybody.
ask something?
Oh, yes.
Sorry. I'm just thinking, thinking what you were saying. Is it what's the kind of what's the general consensus about writing about technology, say? Because as you say, children nowadays, their lives are quite significantly influenced by technology in various
Mm.
ways, screens, and how do publishers tend to relate to that, or do they not really want it within a picture book?
I think the theme is a relevant theme and definitely something to explore. What's tricky about it is actually the visual representation of technology in a picture book because it
Mm,
can date very quickly. So if your book will need to show an iPad and it
yeah,
needs to like an iPad, that's harder. So just think about whether it's going to need to have something specific in. I have seen a couple of examples where technology is actually in a book, but anything you can do to make it feel like it will, like, we want picture books want to be around, we want to be classics, we want them to still be in print 10 years down the line. So you need to think about, will that technology that you have that looks like a phone, will it look like that in 10 years' time, or will that be dated and off-putting? And in which case it might go out of print or not be relevant anymore. So yes, I think the
yeah.
theme is brilliant, but you've got to come across it in a sort of a way that will feel it would last the test of time.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
if you went with a fantasy angle on that, something that's not necessarily real world, you might have more scope there because it wouldn't necessarily have to look like what we have day to day. I mean, you look how computers used to look when I first saw a computer and how they look now. It's very different. Yeah. But
yeah.
what does it look like under the sea? What does a dinosaur's computer look like? There might be more opportunity to play with technology if it's not real world, maybe.
So there's this sense that it's about creating something that's quite timeless in a way,
Hmm.
that's going to stand the test of time because the themes are such that they are timeless and ageless rather than very niche and specific.
Yeah. I think the problem with technology, it just moves so fast and it develops and it changes quickly. But a publisher will want your picture book to be in print for years, and you will want to as well.
Yeah,
So you just have to make sure that it will still be relevant in, a few years' time, 20 years' time,
good point.
and more. Yeah. Good question. Great question. Okay. Well, if anything else crops up, you can get in contact with either of us. And all being well, I shall hope to read lots of your submissions. And they're open until the end of the year. So yeah, thank you, Flora, for giving up your time this evening and for joining us and for being so honest and helpful with such great tips. Yeah, it's been lovely to share the evening with you, and I'm sure everybody is really grateful for you being so, yeah, giving and generous with your time and your questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. And I just want to say to everybody, just try it, go for it, because it really is such an opportunity. And even just the experience, I think, of entering a competition like this can be really valuable, getting that practice of putting yourself out there, putting your words out there. And you never know, you might win. I really
Mm.
hope you do. So good
Mm.
luck. And thank you,
Lovely point
Claire.
to end. Pleasure. That's a lovely point to end on, Flora, and yeah, more good advice. So yeah,
Thank
thank you very much.
you.
Did you think you were? What did you think, Flora? Did you think I've got a chance here? Or did you think got no chance, but why not try it? How were you feeling when you
I
entered?
just didn't know. I did not know. So I thought I'm going to send this out
Mm.
and see what happens. But I knew from experience of going to one of your courses before and having that online that I knew that if I did get a chance to be mentored by you, that it would be really interesting and really useful. And it really, surpassed my expectations. So yeah, thank you for everything, Claire. It's been wonderful.
Pleasure, and I'm sure well, I'm keeping everything crossed that you'll hear more from Flora very soon.
I
Well,
will
I say
do.
very soon. You know how slow publishing is, but maybe in a few years' time.
Yeah,
But look out
when
for
the
us.
time is right.
Follow her journey. Exactly. Exactly. Thank
Mm.
you. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And yeah, good luck with your submissions. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye.